The waves crashed against the jagged rocks below, sending misty sprays of salt water into the air. I stood on the edge of the cliff, staring out at the endless expanse of ocean. The horizon blurred into a hazy line where the sky met the sea, but all I could see was the image burned into my mind: Jessica's phone screen, lit up with messages that weren't meant for me to see. I don't know how long I'd been standing there, but time felt irrelevant. Everything had been a blur since that moment. The moment when the truth I had never imagined came crashing down on me with the force of a tidal wave. Jessica and I had come to Hawaii to reconnect, to escape the monotony of office life, to find the spark that had once made us inseparable. But now, I was standing here alone, with the realization that the woman I loved had betrayed me. It all started innocently enough. A trip to the beach, a couple of surf lessons. Jessica had always been the adventurous one, eager to try new things, to throw herself into whatever life offered. And Greg, God, even his name felt like poison on my tongue, was more than willing to offer her an escape. A charming surf instructor with a perpetual tan and a smile that could melt anyone's defenses. He was exactly the kind of man women dreamed about when they thought of tropical getaways. I wanted to believe that it was just harmless fun, that the extra surf sessions, the late-night chats, were nothing more than friendly banter. But the truth had a way of revealing itself in the most unexpected ways. It was a simple, accidental glance at her phone while she was in the shower. I wasn't snooping, I hadn't even meant to look, but there it was. The truth. The flirty texts, the inside jokes, the promises of stolen moments. Jessica's betrayal wasn't just a fling, it was a full-fledged affair. The weight of it pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. My first instinct was to confront her, to demand answers, to shout and scream and make her feel the same pain that was ripping through me. But then another thought crept into my mind, a darker, colder thought. What if I didn't just confront her? What if I made sure everyone saw her for who she really was? Standing on that cliff, the plan began to take shape in my mind. A way to expose her betrayal, to make sure she couldn't hide behind lies or excuses. I wasn't going to lose my mind over this, I was going to take control. And the first step was to invite Greg to our family gathering, where Jessica would have no place to hide. I turned away from the cliff, the roar of the ocean fading behind me as I made my way back to our villa. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sand, and I knew that this would be the last sunset I watched with Jessica by my side. The last time I'd ever look at her the same way again. This wasn't just the end of our vacation, it was the end of us. The trip to Hawaii had been Jessica's idea. After months of endless meetings, late nights at the office, and the growing distance between us, she'd suggested that we needed a break. "We need to get away," she'd said one night as we sat at our dining table, her voice tired but hopeful. "Someplace far from the office, far from everything. Just you and me." I couldn't argue with her. We both knew that things hadn't been the same for a while. The spark that had once defined us had dimmed over the years, buried under the weight of work, routines, and unspoken frustrations. But Jessica's words had struck a chord in me. I wanted to believe that this trip could be the solution. A chance to rediscover what had brought us together in the first place. Hawaii seemed perfect, a paradise far removed from the grayness of our daily lives. I pictured us walking hand in hand on sunlit beaches, laughing as the waves lapped at our feet, sharing quiet moments under the stars. The promise of those images was enough to make me agree, to push aside my doubts and book the flights. The first few days were everything I'd hoped for. We arrived at the resort, a luxurious hideaway nestled between lush greenery and the sparkling blue ocean. Our villa was a picture of perfection, with wide windows that offered a panoramic view of the sea, and a private terrace where we could sit and watch the sunset together. For the first time in months, Jessica's smile seemed genuine, and I allowed myself to hope that we were finally finding our way back to each other. We spent our days exploring the island, hiking through rainforests, snorkeling in coral reefs, and simply lying on the beach, letting the warmth of the sun sink into our bones. We laughed, we talked, and for a while, it felt like we were us again. The Jessica I'd fallen in love with was there, right beside me, and I clung to that feeling, desperate to make it last. Then Greg entered the picture. We met him on the third day, at the resort's beachfront bar. He was behind the counter, mixing cocktails with effortless skill, his easy charm drawing in everyone around him. When he introduced himself, his hand extended toward Jessica, I noticed the way her eyes lit up. A spark of curiosity flickering in them. She introduced herself with that same, dazzling smile I hadn't seen in months, and my heart sank just a little. Greg wasn't just a bartender. He was also the resort's surf instructor, a man who seemed to embody everything Jessica loved about adventure. He talked about the waves, the thrill of surfing, and how the ocean had a way of washing away all the worries of the world. I watched as Jessica leaned in, completely captivated by his stories, and I felt a pang of something I hadn't expected. Insecurity. When Greg suggested that Jessica join one of his surf classes, she jumped at the chance. "Come on, Michael, it'll be fun," she'd urged, her excitement contagious. But I wasn't a surfer, and the thought of struggling on a board while she glided effortlessly beside Greg didn't appeal to me. So I stayed on the beach, watching from a distance as they disappeared into the waves together. At first, it didn't bother me. I told myself that she was just enjoying the vacation, that there was nothing wrong with her having a bit of fun. But as the days went by, and Jessica's time with Greg grew longer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between us. She'd come back from their surf sessions flushed with excitement, her eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. And yet, when she looked at me, there was a distance in her gaze that hadn't been there before. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself that it was just my imagination, but the doubt gnawed at me. I started to notice the little things, the way she'd glance at her phone with a secretive smile. The excuses she made to spend more time at the beach, the way her laughter seemed to echo in my mind long after she'd left the room. The vacation that had started as a hope for reconnection was slowly turning into something else, something darker. And I was beginning to realize that I might be losing her in ways I never saw coming. The change was subtle at first, like a ripple in still water. Jessica's laughter became more frequent, but it wasn't directed at our shared moments. It was reserved for when she returned from the beach. Her hair still damp from the ocean, her cheeks flushed from exertion, or perhaps something else. I tried to dismiss it, to focus on the vacation we'd come to enjoy, but the unease gnawed at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. She started spending more time with Greg. "Just another surf lesson," she'd say, flashing me that bright smile. "He says I'm getting better every day." I'd nod, forcing a grin, telling myself it was good for her to have fun. But each time she walked away, a knot tightened in my chest. I began noticing the little things. The way she'd linger on her phone after we returned to the villa, how she'd quickly lock the screen when I entered the room. The occasional missed dinner, with excuses of being too tired after surfing all afternoon. It was like watching our relationship slowly unravel, thread by thread, and I didn't know how to stop it. One evening, after another long day of pretending everything was fine, I found myself alone on our terrace, nursing a drink as the sun dipped below the horizon. Jessica was out with Greg again, supposedly for one last surf before the sun goes down. The golden hues of the sunset that once brought me peace now seemed hollow, as if mocking the emptiness that had taken root between us. The truth is, I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to admit that the woman I loved, the woman I'd shared so many years with, could betray me so easily. But as I sat there, replaying the events of the past few days in my mind, the evidence piled up until it was impossible to ignore. Then, it happened. A moment of carelessness, or maybe it was fate. Jessica's phone, left carelessly on the counter as she took a quick shower after her evening with Greg. The screen lit up with a message, and my heart sank when I saw the name. Greg. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. I wasn't the kind of person who invaded someone's privacy. I'd always believed in trust, in respecting boundaries. But the doubt, the gnawing suspicion that had been eating away at me, pushed me past the point of no return. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone and unlocked it. The messages were all there, staring back at me in cold, stark text. Flirty banter, plans to meet up, the excitement of secret rendezvous. Every word felt like a knife, cutting deeper into the wound I hadn't even realized was festering. They spoke in a language of intimacy that was meant only for them, leaving me as nothing more than a shadow in the background of her life. I dropped the phone onto the counter, my hands shaking. My vision blurred as a wave of anger, betrayal, and despair crashed over me. I wanted to confront her, to shout, to demand answers for why she'd thrown away everything we'd built together. But more than that, I wanted her to feel the same pain that was tearing me apart. I paced the room, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. The man I had been, the trusting, loving husband, was gone, replaced by someone who craved justice, who wanted to see her exposed for the liar she was. And then the idea came to me, clear as day. I wouldn't just confront her. That would be too easy. No, I needed to make sure everyone knew the truth. I needed to show her that actions have consequences, that betrayal wasn't something that could be swept under the rug. I needed to do this in a way that would leave a mark on her, just as she had left a mark on me. My plan formed quickly, and the resolve solidified in my chest. Tomorrow, I would invite Greg to our family gathering. I would ensure that Jessica had no idea what was coming. And when the time was right, I would pull the rug out from under her, revealing her infidelity in front of everyone we knew. As I heard the water stop in the bathroom, I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. Jessica would come out soon, none the wiser to the fact that her world was about to come crashing down. I knew there was no turning back now. The decision had been made, and I would see it through to the end. I went back to the terrace, looking out at the darkened sky. The stars beginning to peek through. It was the calm before the storm, and I was ready to unleash it. The next morning, I awoke with a strange sense of clarity. The previous night's turmoil had settled into a cold, focused resolve. Jessica was still asleep beside me, her breathing soft and even, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. I watched her for a moment, the woman I had once believed would be by my side for the rest of my life, and felt nothing but a deep, hollow emptiness. Whatever love had been there was now drowned in the bitterness of betrayal. I slipped out of bed and made my way to the kitchen, where the warm Hawaiian sun was already streaming through the windows. I brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the room as I went over my plan in my head. Today would be the day I set everything in motion. We had planned a small gathering that evening, a casual get-together with a few people we'd met at the resort. It was supposed to be a chance to share stories, drink some wine, and enjoy the last days of our vacation. But now, it would serve a different purpose. It would be the stage for Jessica's downfall. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, I took out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Greg's number. We'd exchanged numbers earlier in the trip, back when I still believed he was nothing more than a friendly surf instructor. I stared at his name for a moment, my finger hovering over the screen, before I finally pressed call. Single quote dot. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, Michael. What's up, man? His voice was as annoyingly cheerful as ever, and I had to force myself to keep my tone casual. Hey, Greg. I was just thinking, we're having a little gathering at our villa tonight, and I thought it would be cool if you joined us. You've been such a big part of our trip, and it would be great to have you there. There was a brief pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'd love to come. What time should I be there? Let's say around 7, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Just a few of us, nothing too fancy. Bring a bottle of whatever you're drinking. Will do. Looking forward to it. We exchanged a few more pleasantries before hanging up, and I put my phone down with a sense of grim satisfaction. Greg had no idea what he was walking into, and neither did Jessica. It was perfect. I spent the rest of the day playing the role of the attentive husband. I suggested a walk along the beach. where we reminisced about our favorite moments from the trip, moments that now felt like lies. We had lunch at a quaint seaside cafe, where Jessica laughed and talked as if nothing had changed. I smiled and nodded, hiding the anger simmering beneath the surface. As the afternoon wore on, Jessica mentioned that she was going to meet Greg for one last surf session before our gathering. "You should come with us," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. I shook my head, masking my disdain with a chuckle. "I think I'll just relax here for a bit. You two go ahead." She hesitated for a moment, then leaned in to kiss me on the cheek. "Okay, I won't be long." I watched her walk away, her surfboard under one arm, her silhouette framed by the golden light of the setting sun. It was the last time I'd ever see her as the woman I loved. By the time she returned, everything would be different. When Jessica finally came back, she was glowing with the same energy that had drawn her to Greg in the first place. I had to bite back the urge to confront her right then and there, but I reminded myself that patience would pay off. Tonight would be the night. As the clock approached 7, I set the scene. The villa was warm and inviting, the table laid out with snacks, drinks, and candles flickering softly. It was the perfect picture of a relaxed evening with friends. Jessica, unaware of my true intentions, moved around the room, making sure everything was just right, oblivious to the fact that she was setting the stage for her own humiliation. The first guests arrived, filling the villa with laughter and conversation. I played the gracious host, shaking hands, offering drinks, and making small talk. But all the while, I kept one eye on the door, waiting for the moment Greg would walk in. Finally, just after 7, he arrived. Greg strolled in with his usual laid-back confidence, a bottle of rum in hand, flashing that easy smile that had ensnared my wife. Jessica greeted him warmly, too warmly, and I saw the way their eyes lingered on each other for just a moment too long. As the evening progressed, I bided my time, letting the anticipation build. I waited until everyone was settled, glasses in hand, laughter filling the room. Then, when the moment was right, I caught Greg's eye and motioned him over. "Hey, Greg," I began, my voice loud enough to capture everyone's attention. "I wanted to thank you for being such a big part of our trip. Jessica's been having a great time with those surf lessons, hasn't she?" Jessica's smile faltered, just for a second, but I caught it. Greg grinned, completely oblivious. "Yeah, she's a natural. We've had some good times out there." I nodded, feigning camaraderie. "I bet you have. In fact, I think there's something everyone here would find interesting." "Jessica, why don't you tell them about all those late-night surf sessions you've been having?" The room went silent. Jessica's eyes widened, her face paling as she realized what was happening. Greg looked between us, confused, his smile fading as the tension in the room became palpable. "What are you talking about, Michael?" Jessica's voice was shaky, her confidence crumbling under the weight of the moment. I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I pulled out my phone and tapped a few buttons, bringing up the messages I'd seen the night before. Without a word, I handed the phone to Greg, letting him see the truth for himself. His face went ashen as he scrolled through the texts, the realization hitting him like a ton of bricks. He looked up at Jessica, betrayal and shock in his eyes, while the rest of the room watched in stunned silence. Jessica's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the screen, her world crumbling around her. "Michael, please. Let's talk about this privately," she whispered, her voice trembling with desperation. But I was past the point of mercy. "Oh, we'll talk," I said coldly. "But first, I think everyone here deserves to know who they've been spending their evening with." The guests, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing unease, exchanged glances, murmurs of confusion and discomfort rippling through the room. Jessica stood there, frozen, her face a mask of shock and humiliation as the reality of her betrayal was laid bare for everyone to see. Greg, who had dropped my phone onto the table like it was burning his hands, took a step back, his confidence shattered. He couldn't meet my eyes, nor could he look at Jessica. The charming surf instructor was now just a man who had been caught in a lie, exposed for the fraud he was. And as I stood there, watching the fallout of my carefully orchestrated revenge, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. And the life we had built together, the future we had planned, was now nothing more than a broken dream. Jessica's eyes, filled with tears, searched mine for any sign of forgiveness, but she found none. The damage was done, and there was no going back. The room was heavy with silence, the guests too stunned to speak. Unsure of what to do. Finally, Jessica turned and fled, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the villa as she ran from the consequences of her actions. I watched her go, knowing that this was the end of our story. But as she disappeared into the night, I couldn't help but feel a hollow emptiness settle over me. Revenge had been mine, but at what cost? The villa was quiet now, the echoes of the evening's chaos still lingering in the air. After Jessica had fled, the party had quickly dissolved into an awkward mess of hushed whispers and nervous glances. No one knew what to say or do, and I had no interest in playing host anymore. I stood in the middle of the room, watching as one by one, our guests made their excuses and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Greg was the last to go. He'd tried to apologize, to stammer out some excuse for his actions, but I'd cut him off with a cold, dismissive wave of my hand. There was nothing he could say that would make any of this better, nothing that could undo the damage he and Jessica had caused. So he left, his head hung low, as I stood there, feeling the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me like a physical burden. When the last door clicked shut, the silence became deafening. I was alone, truly alone for the first time in years. The villa, which had once felt warm and inviting, now seemed cold and empty, a hollow shell of the life I'd thought I had. I walked over to the table, where the remnants of the night lay scattered, half-empty glasses, a few untouched plates of food. My phone still lying where Greg had dropped it. I picked it up, staring at the black screen for a moment before locking it and slipping it into my pocket. There were no more messages to be read, no more secrets to uncover. The truth was out, and there was nothing left to do but face the consequences. I wandered out to the terrace, where the night air was cool and refreshing against my skin. The ocean stretched out before me, dark and endless, the sound of the waves a constant reminder of the paradise that had turned into a nightmare. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the horizon, wondering what came next. The anger that had driven me for the past 24 hours was gone, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. I had gotten my revenge, had exposed Jessica's betrayal for everyone to see, but it didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, all I felt was a hollow emptiness, a sense of loss that I couldn't shake. I thought about Jessica, about the look in her eyes when she realized what I had done. The shock, the betrayal, the heartbreak, she had never seen it coming. I had caught her off guard, had torn apart the illusion of our marriage in one swift, brutal moment. And now, she was out there somewhere, alone and broken, just like me. A part of me wanted to go after her, to find her and talk things through, to see if there was anything left to salvage. But I knew it was too late for that. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. We were beyond repair, two shattered pieces of a life that had once been whole. As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. I turned to see Jessica standing in the doorway, her face pale and tear-streaked, her eyes red from crying. She looked like a ghost of the woman I had married, fragile and broken, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But the memory of what she had done, of the betrayal that had cut so deep, kept me rooted in place, my heart hardened against whatever plea she might make. "Michael," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond right away, letting the silence stretch between us like a chasm. I wanted to hear what she had to say, but at the same time, I didn't know if I could bear it. Finally, I nodded, gesturing for her to come closer. She stepped onto the terrace, the night air ruffling her hair, making her look even more vulnerable. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together, and looked up at me with eyes full of regret. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I never meant for it to get this far. I never wanted to hurt you." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I wanted to believe her, to believe that she was truly remorseful, but the pain was still too fresh, the wound too raw. "How long?" I asked, my voice cold and distant. "How long have you been lying to me?" She hesitated, her eyes dropping to the ground. "It started a few days ago, but it was just a distraction at first." I was confused, lost in everything we've been going through. "But I didn't mean for it to go this far, Michael. I swear." I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of the woman I'd once known. But all I saw was a stranger, someone who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I wanted to lash out, to scream and demand answers, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done, and no amount of apologies could fix what had been broken. "You threw everything away for what?" I asked, my voice rising with the anger I could no longer contain. "For some fling with a surf instructor? Was it worth it, Jessica? Was he worth it?" She flinched at my words, tears spilling down her cheeks as she shook her head. "No, he wasn't worth it. None of this was worth it. I don't even know why I did it. I was just lost. I didn't know how to find my way back to us." Her words cut through me, reopening the wound I'd tried to close. I wanted to believe her. To think that this was just a mistake, a terrible lapse in judgment. But the trust we'd built over the years was gone, shattered beyond repair. "I can't do this anymore, Jessica," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't be with someone who could hurt me like this. I don't know who you are anymore." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands as the reality of my words sank in. I wanted to comfort her, to hold her and tell her that everything would be okay, but I knew it would be a lie. There was no coming back from this. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I looked out at the dark ocean, the waves crashing against the shore in a steady rhythm, as if mocking the chaos in my heart. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know that we can't go back to the way things were. Too much has happened. Too much has changed." She nodded, her shoulders slumping as the last vestiges of hope slipped away. "I understand." We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, two broken people standing on the edge of a life that had crumbled around us. Finally, Jessica turned and walked away, leaving me alone on the terrace, staring out at the endless horizon. As I watched her go, I felt the weight of everything that had happened settle over me like a heavy shroud. The life we'd built together was gone, destroyed by betrayal and lies. And now, all that was left was the darkness of an uncertain future. The days that followed were a blur, a mess of emotions that I couldn't quite process. After Jessica walked out that night, I was left alone in the villa, surrounded by the remnants of a life that no longer existed. I went through the motions, eating, sleeping, packing, doing whatever I could to keep myself occupied, to keep the thoughts from overwhelming me. But the pain was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Our flight back home was booked for the next day, but the idea of returning to the life we'd built together felt like a cruel joke. How could I go back to the house where every corner held memories of us? How could I sit at my desk at work and pretend that everything was normal? The thought of facing my colleagues, who would undoubtedly notice the change in me, filled me with dread. I needed to get away, to put as much distance between myself and the wreckage of my marriage as possible. I didn't tell Jessica about my plans. I simply packed my bags, left a note on the bed, and walked out the door without looking back. I booked a hotel in a different part of the island, away from the resort where we'd stayed, away from the memories that haunted me. It was a modest place, nothing like the luxury villa we'd shared. But it was quiet and, most importantly, it was mine. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next as I tried to make sense of what had happened. I spent hours walking along the beach, the sound of the waves a constant companion, but even the beauty of the ocean couldn't soothe the ache in my chest. I felt like I was drifting, lost in a sea of emotions that I couldn't navigate. I didn't reach out to anyone back home. I wasn't ready to answer their questions, to hear their pity or their shock. I didn't want to explain how my marriage had fallen apart, how the woman I'd loved had betrayed me with a man we barely knew. I wasn't ready to face the reality of it all. But as the days turned into a week, I realized that I couldn't run forever. I couldn't stay on this island, hiding from the world, pretending that everything would somehow fix itself. I had to confront what had happened, had to start figuring out what my life would look like now that everything had changed. It was on the 7th day that I made the decision to go back home. I didn't know what I would find there, didn't know how I would face the empty house or the people who would inevitably ask questions. But I knew that I couldn't stay in limbo any longer. I had to start picking up the pieces, no matter how shattered they were. I called the airline and booked a flight for the next morning. As I packed my bags, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It wasn't the calm of someone who had found peace, but rather the calm of someone who had accepted that there was no escaping the pain. I had to face it head on, had to confront the reality of my new life. The flight home was uneventful, a long stretch of time where I was left alone with my thoughts. I replayed everything that had happened over and over in my mind, the betrayal, the confrontation, the way Jessica had looked at me with those tear-filled eyes. But no matter how many times I went over it, I couldn't make sense of it. There was no logic, no reason that could explain why everything had fallen apart. When I finally landed, the familiar sights of home greeted me with a bittersweet pang. The city felt the same, but I knew that I wasn't. I was a different person now, someone who had been broken by the one he loved most. I took a cab from the airport, giving the driver the address to my home. As we drove through the streets, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. I wasn't ready for this, but I knew I had no choice. The house looked the same as it always had, but as I stepped inside, I was struck by how empty it felt. The air was heavy with the absence of Jessica, the silence almost deafening. I walked through the rooms, taking in the remnants of our life together, photos on the walls, her favorite throw blanket on the couch, the coffee mug she always used still sitting on the counter. Everything was exactly as we'd left it, as if time had stood still while I was away. But it wasn't the same. It would never be the same again. I dropped my bags at the foot of the stairs and stood in the middle of the living room. Feeling the weight of the past week crash down on me all at once. The emotions I'd been trying to keep at bay, the anger, the sadness, the betrayal, came flooding back, overwhelming me in a way I hadn't anticipated. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands as the tears finally came. I had been holding them back for so long, trying to be strong, trying to keep it all together. But now, in the privacy of my empty home, I couldn't hold them back any longer. I cried for the life we'd lost. For the future we'd never have. I cried for the love that had been shattered, for the trust that had been broken. I cried until I had no tears left, until I was completely spent. When I finally lifted my head, the room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. I felt exhausted, drained, but there was a strange sense of relief that came with it. I had let it all out, had faced the pain instead of running from it. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. I knew that this was just the beginning of a long, difficult journey. There would be more tears, more anger, more moments of doubt and pain. But I also knew that I couldn't stay in this place forever. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life, even if it felt impossible right now. I stood up, wiping my face with the back of my hand, and walked over to the stairs. The house was still empty, still filled with reminders of what had been, but it was also mine. I had to reclaim it, had to make it a place where I could heal. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I felt a flicker of resolve. It wasn't much, just a small spark of determination, but it was enough to keep me moving. I would get through this, somehow. I would find a way to pick up the pieces and start again. And maybe, one day, I would find a way to forgive, not just Jessica, but myself. The days blurred together as I tried to settle back into some semblance of normalcy. I returned to work, focusing on the projects I had left behind, using them as a distraction from the chaos in my personal life. My colleagues were polite enough not to pry, though I could sense their curiosity. I brushed off their questions with vague answers, unwilling to let anyone too close. But even as I tried to keep moving forward, the weight of what had happened remained. The house felt emptier than ever, each room a painful reminder of the life Jessica and I had once shared. I avoided our bedroom as much as possible, opting to sleep on the couch instead. It was easier that way, less painful. It was on one of these nights, as I lay staring at the ceiling, that my phone buzzed with a notification. I reached for it, half expecting another work email or some useless alert. But what I saw made my heart stop. It was a message from Jessica. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. I wasn't sure I was ready to read whatever she had to say. Part of me wanted to delete it without opening it, to keep whatever distance I could between us. But curiosity and the unresolved emotions I had buried deep within me won out. I opened the message. Michael, I don't even know where to start. I'm not sure if you'll even read this, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. I've had a lot of time to think, and I know that what I did was unforgivable. I can't even begin to explain why I did it, because I don't fully understand it myself. All I know is that I hurt you, and that's something I'll never forgive myself for. Her words were a punch to the gut, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. I could almost hear her voice as I read, could picture her sitting somewhere, typing out the message with tears in her eyes. But the pain she described, the regret she felt, none of it could erase what had happened. None of it could change the fact that she had betrayed me. I kept reading. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't think I deserve it. But I hope that someday you can find it in your heart to move on, to be happy again. I don't know what that looks like for you, for us, but I needed to say this. I needed you to know that I never stopped loving you, even when I was at my worst. I'm sorry, Michael. I truly am. The message ended there, leaving me with a flood of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Anger, sadness, confusion. They all mixed together in a way that left me feeling dizzy. I set the phone down and buried my face in my hands, trying to make sense of what I had just read. What was I supposed to do with this? What was I supposed to feel? A part of me wanted to respond, to lash out and tell her how much she had hurt me. How her actions had destroyed everything we had built together. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, just felt sad. Sad that it had come to this, that the love we had once shared had turned into something so broken and painful. I didn't respond to the message that night. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there in the darkness, letting the weight of her words sink in. She was sorry. She was hurting too. But was that enough? Could it ever be enough to heal the rift between us? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that the life I had known was gone, and I had to figure out how to move forward, with or without her. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. But even as I slept, her words lingered, haunting my dreams, reminding me of the pain that had yet to fade. The following week was a period of reluctant adjustment. I was trying to establish a new routine, something to distract myself from the constant reminder of my fractured life. I focused on work, on organizing the house, and on keeping myself busy. I even started to consider small changes, rearranging furniture, redecorating a bit, as if somehow shifting the physical environment would help shift my emotional state. One morning, while I was out running errands, I decided to stop by a local coffee shop I had passed 1,000 times but never actually visited. It seemed like a small, insignificant change, but I hoped it would be a step toward breaking the monotony of my daily routine. As I walked in, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods was comforting, a welcome distraction from the turmoil in my mind. I ordered my coffee and found a seat by the window. The place was quaint and bustling with a mix of regulars and new faces. I pulled out my phone, intending to catch up on work emails, but found my mind wandering instead. I was lost in thought when I noticed a familiar face enter the cafe. It was Greg, the surf instructor from Hawaii. My initial reaction was one of shock. Seeing him here, so far from where everything had gone wrong, felt like a cruel twist of fate. I wanted to avoid him, to get up and leave, but he had already spotted me. His expression shifted from confusion to recognition as he approached my table. "Michael," he said, his voice hesitant. "I didn't expect to see you here." I looked up at him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Greg, what are you doing here?" He sat down across from me, a look of genuine concern on his face. "I'm sorry. I know this must be awkward. I just wanted to talk." I was taken aback. Talk? After everything that had happened, what could he possibly have to say? "I'm not sure there's anything left to say," I replied, my tone cold. "You've done enough damage." Greg nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I understand. But I needed to explain, to try to make things right in some way. I never meant for things to end up like this. I never wanted to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh. "Is that supposed to make me feel better? Knowing that you didn't intend to cause this much pain?" "No," Greg said, shaking his head. "I know it doesn't. But I feel responsible for a part of it. I should have walked away when I realized what was happening. I didn't want to be the cause of your pain, Michael." His admission surprised me. I had expected him to come in with more excuses or deflections, but his honesty, however painful, was a stark contrast to what I had anticipated. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why not just leave things alone?" Greg sighed, looking down at his coffee. "Because I couldn't live with myself knowing that I never tried to make amends. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, that I regret everything that happened. And if there's anything I can do to make it right, I want to at least try." I studied him, trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. Part of me wanted to lash out, to confront him with all the anger and hurt I had been holding in. But another part of me was weary, tired of the constant battle within myself. "I don't know what you can do," I said finally. "Nothing you say or do will undo what's happened. But I appreciate that you're trying to make things right." Greg nodded, understanding the finality in my tone. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry, Michael. I wish things had turned out differently." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of our conversation hanging between us. The cafe around us continued with its normal hustle, but for me, it felt like time had stopped. This unexpected encounter had brought up a new layer of complexity to my already turbulent emotions. Eventually, Greg stood up to leave, giving me a final, apologetic look. "Thank you for hearing me out," he said before walking away. I watched him go, feeling a strange mix of relief and residual anger. The encounter hadn't resolved anything, but it had brought some closure to a part of my life that I hadn't been able to fully address. I was still angry, still hurt, but perhaps I was beginning to understand that forgiveness wasn't necessarily about letting go of the pain, but about moving forward despite it. As I finished my coffee and left the cafe, I felt a sense of quiet resolve settling over me. The road to healing was long and uncertain, but I was starting to see that there were steps I could take, no matter how small, to move forward. I couldn't change the past, but I could control how I faced the future. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start the journey toward finding some semblance of peace. The days after the encounter with Greg were filled with a strange mix of reflection and determination. I had started to accept that my life had irrevocably changed and that moving forward was the only viable option. It wasn't easy, and the pain still lingered, but each day seemed to bring a little more clarity about what needed to be done. I began to focus on practical matters, sorting through the clutter of our old life, making decisions about what to keep and what to let go. It was a difficult process, filled with emotional landmines. Each item I touched was a reminder of Jessica, of the life we had built together. and the pain of its destruction. I took it one step at a time, trying to be methodical, trying to focus on the future rather than the past. I knew I had to start making real changes, both to the house and to my own routine. I decided to redecorate the living room and bedroom, creating spaces that felt like mine rather than ours. I hired a contractor to help with the renovations, choosing colors and designs that felt fresh and new, hoping that they would help signal a new beginning. During this time, I also took up new hobbies to occupy my mind. I joined a local hiking group, finding solace in the solitude of nature and the camaraderie of new friends. I started taking cooking classes, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. These new activities became a way to reclaim my sense of self, to rediscover interests and passions that had been overshadowed by the complications of my marriage. As I worked through these changes, I began to feel a shift in my perspective. The pain was still there, but it was accompanied by a sense of purpose. I was taking control of my life again, making choices that were for me, rather than for us. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about building something new from the remnants. One day, as I was working on the living room renovation, I received another message, this time from Jessica's lawyer. She was seeking a divorce, and the legal process needed to be addressed. The message was formal and clinical, a stark reminder that our marriage was coming to an official end. I read through the documents with a heavy heart, but I felt a strange sense of relief as well. The divorce was a necessary step toward closing this chapter of my life, and although it was painful, it was also an opportunity to finalize the separation and move forward. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer to discuss the details and to begin the process of entangling our lives. The following week, I met with the lawyer and went over the paperwork. We discussed the division of assets and the details of the divorce settlement. It was a sobering experience, but I approached it with a calm determination. I was ready to finalize this part of the process and start focusing on rebuilding my life. After the meeting, I took a walk through the park near my home, reflecting on everything that had happened. The park was peaceful, with families enjoying the day and children playing. It was a stark contrast to the turmoil I had experienced, and it reminded me that life continued, regardless of personal pain. As I walked, I thought about what I wanted for my future. The divorce was just one step in a larger journey toward healing and self-discovery. I had a clearer sense of what I wanted, a life that was fulfilling, meaningful, and authentically mine. I wanted to build new relationships, explore new opportunities, and embrace the possibility of happiness once more. I knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but I was ready to face them. The pain of the past was still a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was learning to navigate through it, to find strength in the midst of adversity, and to take charge of my own destiny. As I left the park and headed home, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The journey was far from over, but I was beginning to see that there was light at the end of the tunnel. I was moving forward, step by step, and that was the most important thing. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of optimism about what the future might hold. The day of the family gathering arrived with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The event was supposed to be a celebration of my niece's graduation, an occasion that would typically bring the family together for laughter, memories, and joy. This time, however, I approached it with a different purpose. I had invited Greg, despite the complex emotions I felt, to confront the past and make a statement. The gathering was held at my sister's house, a large, welcoming space that was usually filled with the warmth and chaos of family life. This time, it felt different. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and I was acutely aware of the eyes that would be watching, the whispers that would follow. I had prepared myself for this, but the reality of it was still overwhelming. When Greg arrived, I noticed him standing awkwardly at the edge of the room, trying to blend in with the crowd. He looked nervous but determined. I saw the concern in his eyes as he scanned the room, searching for me. I took a deep breath and walked over to him. "Greg," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thank you for coming." He offered a tentative smile. Thank you for inviting me, Michael. I wasn't sure what to expect. We stood together for a moment, making small talk as we waited for the gathering to fully get underway. I could feel the weight of my decision bearing down on me, but I was committed. This was my chance to address the situation publicly, to confront the betrayal and assert my own sense of closure. As the guests mingled and the food was served, I waited for the right moment. Finally, when the room was full and everyone was gathered for the toast, I took a deep breath and made my way to the front of the room. I could feel the eyes of the family on me, their curiosity piqued by my sudden movement. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice echoing through the room. "I'd like to say a few words before we start the celebration." The room fell silent, the chatter dying down as people turned their attention toward me. I could see the tension in their expressions, the unspoken questions about what was happening. "I know this might come as a surprise," I continued, trying to keep my voice calm. "But there's something important I need to address. Some of you might know that my marriage to Jessica ended recently. It was a difficult and painful experience, one that I've been trying to come to terms with." There were murmurs of sympathy and concern from the crowd, but I pressed on, focusing on my purpose. "I invited Greg here today because he played a role in what happened between Jessica and me. It was a choice I made to address the situation openly, to confront it rather than allowing it to linger as an unspoken wound." Greg shifted uncomfortably beside me, his eyes scanning the room. I could feel the weight of his apology in his posture, in the way he tried to make himself small and unobtrusive. "I wanted to let everyone know that while this has been a painful chapter in my life, I'm working through it," I said, my voice faltering slightly. "I'm choosing to face it head on, to find closure and move forward. It's not about seeking revenge or causing more pain, but about reclaiming my own sense of peace." I turned to Greg, offering him a nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you for coming and for being here. It means a lot to me." Greg nodded back, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. The room remained silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling in. After a pause, my sister stepped forward, her face filled with understanding. "Let's all take a moment to appreciate the honesty and courage it took to address this. We're here to support you, Michael." The tension in the room began to ease, the mood shifting as people resumed their conversations and the focus returned to the celebration. It wasn't the joyous occasion it might have been, but there was a sense of relief, of closure, that came with facing the truth publicly. As the evening went on, I found myself mingling with family and friends, receiving words of support and sympathy. The gathering wasn't the end of my journey, but it was a significant step toward moving forward. It was an acknowledgement that the past couldn't be erased, but it could be faced with dignity and resolve. When the event was over and the guests had left, I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. I had confronted the situation publicly, had taken a stand for my own sense of closure. It was a difficult and emotional evening, but it had given me a renewed sense of clarity and strength. As I cleaned up the remnants of the gathering and prepared for the quiet solitude of the evening, I realized that I was beginning to find my way again. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I was learning to navigate it with a newfound resilience. The future was still unknown, but I was moving forward, step by step, with the support of those who cared about me and the strength I was discovering within myself. The days following the family gathering felt quieter, marked by a return to the routine I had been establishing. My efforts to move forward had begun to settle into a new normal. Work was busy, my new hobbies were becoming enjoyable, and the house was slowly transforming into a space that felt uniquely mine. It was during this period of relative calm that I received another unexpected message. This time, it was from Jessica. The message was brief, but the content was startling. "Michael, I need to talk to you. There's something important I haven't told you. Please call me when you can." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. The previous conversations with Jessica had been heavy and filled with regret. But this felt different, more urgent. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep moving forward without reopening old wounds. But another part of me felt a nagging curiosity. What could she possibly have left to say? I decided to call her. The phone rang a few times before Jessica answered. Her voice, when she spoke, was strained, as if she were on the verge of tears. Michael, thank you for calling. I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear from me, but I needed to explain something that's been weighing on me. Her tone was serious, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. What is it, Jessica? I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, she began, her voice trembling. And there's something I haven't told you. Something important. I braced myself for whatever was coming, trying to keep my emotions in check. Go ahead. There's something you need to know about Greg, she said, her voice cracking. He wasn't just an affair. There's more to it. He was using me. I felt a jolt of surprise. Using you for what? For money, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize it at first, but he was manipulating me. He was pretending to be interested in me, but he had an ulterior motive. He was in debt, and he saw me as a way to solve his financial problems. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. I had suspected many things about Greg, but this was new information. Why didn't you tell me this before? I was ashamed, Jessica admitted. I didn't want to admit that I had been so foolish. That I had been manipulated. It's been eating me up inside, and I realized that if there's any chance of finding some peace or closure, I needed to tell you the truth. I processed her words, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. So, you're saying Greg was just using you, and that's why things fell apart? Yes, Jessica said. I was blinded by my feelings, and I didn't see the truth until it was too late. I should have been honest with you from the beginning, but I was scared and embarrassed. I was silent for a moment, trying to digest the information. It didn't change the past, but it did add a new layer of complexity to the situation. Greg's actions had been more calculated than I had imagined, and it made the betrayal feel even more bitter. Thank you for telling me, I said finally, my voice steady. I appreciate your honesty, even though it's difficult to hear. Jessica sighed, her relief palpable even over the phone. I understand if this changes things between us, but I needed to be honest with you. I'm truly sorry for everything. I appreciate that, I said. I need some time to process this. It's a lot to take in. I understand, Jessica replied. I'll give you space. Thank you for listening. We ended the call, and I sat there in silence, feeling a swirl of emotions. The revelation about Greg didn't undo the pain or the betrayal, but it did provide some clarity. It was a reminder that the situation had been more complex than I had realized, and it reinforced my decision to move forward. As I reflected on the conversation, I realized that while the truth about Greg was a painful addition to the story, it was also a final piece of the puzzle. It allowed me to see the situation in its entirety, to understand the motivations and deceptions that had played a role in our downfall. With this new understanding, I felt a renewed sense of resolve. The past had been filled with deception and hurt, but I was determined to move beyond it. I would continue to focus on rebuilding my life, to find new paths and opportunities that were true to who I was. It was a difficult journey, but it was mine to navigate. And with each step, I was getting closer to the peace and closure I sought. The future was still uncertain, but I was learning to embrace it with strength and resilience. In the weeks following Jessica's revelation, I found myself grappling with a new sense of clarity about my situation. The truth about Greg had shifted my perspective, adding complexity but also providing a final piece to the puzzle. I began to channel my energy into moving forward, focusing on rebuilding my life in a way that was both meaningful and fulfilling. I started by diving deeper into my new hobbies and interests. The hiking group I had joined became a significant part of my routine. The time spent outdoors, navigating trails and enjoying the beauty of nature, provided both physical exercise and mental respite. It was a way to clear my head and find solace in the simplicity of the natural world. Cooking classes. 2. Became a source of joy and discovery. I experimented with new recipes, learned about different cuisines, and began to develop a sense of confidence in the kitchen. Each meal I prepared felt like a small victory, a way to reclaim a sense of control and creativity in my life. Work continued to be a source of stability. I threw myself into my projects, using them as a means to channel my focus and energy. The demands of my job provided a welcome distraction from the emotional turbulence I had experienced. It also gave me a sense of accomplishment and purpose, reminding me of my professional strengths and capabilities. One day, while preparing dinner, I received a call from a close friend. It was someone I had known for years, someone who had supported me through various life events. They had heard about my recent struggles and wanted to catch up. I welcomed the opportunity to reconnect and talk openly. During our conversation, I shared some of the changes I had been making and the progress I felt I was making in moving forward. My friend listened attentively and offered encouragement, acknowledging the difficulty of my journey but also celebrating the steps I was taking toward healing and renewal. "I'm proud of you for how you've handled everything, Michael," my friend said. "It's not easy to confront such deep pain and still find a way to move forward. But you're doing it. You're finding your way." Their words were a balm to my soul, reinforcing the positive steps I was taking. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this journey. That there were people who cared about me and wanted to see me succeed. A few days later, I decided to visit a therapist. It had been suggested by several friends and family members, and I finally took the step to seek professional guidance. The sessions provided a space to explore my feelings, to understand my reactions, and to develop strategies for coping with the emotional aftermath of my experiences. The therapist's insights were valuable, helping me gain perspective and find new ways to address the challenges I faced. As time went on, I began to envision a future that was both hopeful and promising. I considered the possibility of new relationships, new experiences, and new opportunities. While I wasn't ready to jump into anything immediately, I was open to the idea of exploring what life had to offer beyond the pain of my past. One evening, as I sat in the newly decorated living room, I reflected on the journey I had been on. The room, once a symbol of the life Jessica and I had shared, now felt like a blank canvas, a place where I could create new memories and embrace a new chapter. The process of moving forward wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments of doubt, of sadness, and of uncertainty. But there was also a growing sense of hope and resilience. I was learning to navigate the complexities of my emotions, to find strength in the midst of adversity, and to take ownership of my own happiness. As I looked around the room, I felt a sense of contentment. I had come a long way from the pain and heartbreak of the past, and I was beginning to see the possibility of a future filled with new beginnings. The road ahead was still unfolding, but I was ready to embrace it with courage and optimism. In the end, it was clear that moving forward was about more than just letting go of the past. It was about building a new life, discovering new passions, and finding joy in the journey ahead. The path wasn't always easy, but with each step, I was getting closer to a future that was truly my own. And as I took that next step, I did so with a renewed sense of hope and determination, ready to face whatever came next with strength and grace. Months had passed since the family gathering and Jessica's revelation. Life had settled into a new rhythm, one marked by growth and self-discovery. I had embraced the changes and continued to find solace in my new routines. My work, hobbies, and newfound sense of self had created a semblance of normalcy, and I was starting to feel more at ease with the path I had chosen. One afternoon, while I was out for a hike, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but something prompted me to answer. "Hello?" I said, trying to catch my breath from the climb. "Michael, it's Greg," came the voice on the other end. I was momentarily taken aback. Greg had been quiet for a while, and I hadn't expected to hear from him again. "Greg, what's up? I know it's been a while," he began, his voice earnest. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I wanted to reach out and see how you're doing." I paused, considering his words. I'm doing all right. Why do you want to talk? I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. Greg said. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make amends in any way I can. I know this isn't easy, but I hope we can at least talk things through. I weighed his request carefully. My initial reaction was one of skepticism. Greg had been a significant part of the pain I'd experienced, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to revisit those feelings. But a part of me also recognized the value of closure, of addressing unresolved issues. I'm open to talking, I said finally. But let's do it in person. It'll be better if we're face to face. Greg agreed, and we arranged to meet at a local cafe a few days later. The day of our meeting, I felt a mix of apprehension and curiosity. It was an opportunity to confront the past, but it also carried the risk of reopening old wounds. When I arrived at the cafe, I saw Greg waiting at a table near the window. He looked older, more worn than I remembered. As I approached, he stood up, offering a tentative smile. Hey, Michael, he said. Thanks for agreeing to meet with me. Hi, Greg, I replied, sitting down across from him. Let's get to it. We ordered coffee and began talking. Greg started by acknowledging his role in the turmoil of my life, expressing genuine regret for his actions. He spoke about his financial troubles and the choices he had made that led him to manipulate Jessica. I want you to know, Greg said, that I regret everything. I was selfish and made a lot of mistakes. I never intended to hurt you, but I understand that's exactly what I did. I listened, trying to absorb his words. There was something about his tone, his willingness to face the truth, that made me feel a pang of empathy. It didn't change what had happened, but it did offer a different perspective. I appreciate your honesty, I said. It doesn't erase the past, but it helps to understand your side of things. We continued to talk, delving into the details of what had transpired. Greg explained the full extent of his financial struggles, how he had been desperate and made poor choices. He also shared how the experience had been a wake-up call for him, prompting him to seek help and make changes in his life. I've been working on turning things around, Greg said. I've gotten financial counseling and made efforts to rebuild my life. I know it's too late to fix what happened between us, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to make things right. Our conversation was long and intense, filled with moments of discomfort and reflection. But by the end, there was a sense of mutual understanding. It was clear that Greg was genuinely remorseful, and I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. As we finished our coffee, Greg stood up, looking relieved. Thank you for listening, Michael. I know this wasn't easy, but I appreciate you giving me a chance to explain. I nodded, feeling a mixture of closure and resolve. I'm glad we talked. It's helped me to understand things better. We parted ways with a handshake, and I left the cafe feeling a sense of finality. The conversation hadn't changed the past, but it had given me a sense of closure and allowed me to move forward with a clearer mind. The following days were marked by a renewed sense of peace. I continued to focus on my own growth and the positive changes I had made. The journey was far from over, but I felt more equipped to face whatever came next. Reconnecting with Greg had been a difficult but necessary step in my healing process. It had provided a final piece of closure and allowed me to fully embrace the future. As I moved forward, I did so with a greater sense of understanding and a commitment to living a life that was truly my own. With the conversation with Greg behind me, I felt a renewed sense of clarity and direction. The final pieces of closure had fallen into place, allowing me to focus more fully on the future. As I continued to rebuild my life, I began to explore new opportunities and embrace changes that had once seemed daunting. One of the most significant changes was the decision to travel. I had always enjoyed the idea of exploring new places, but the circumstances of my past had made it difficult to fully embrace the adventure. Now, with a clearer sense of purpose, I began planning a trip that would allow me to immerse myself in a new environment and gain fresh perspectives. I chose a destination that had long intrigued me, an isolated coastal town known for its natural beauty and artistic community. It was a place where I could unwind, reflect, and engage in new experiences. The idea of stepping away from the familiar and exploring a new setting was invigorating. As I prepared for the trip, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was a step into the unknown, but it was also a chance to rediscover myself and explore new interests. I spent time researching the area, planning activities, and setting goals for the trip. I wanted it to be more than just a vacation. I wanted it to be a transformative experience. When the day of departure arrived, I packed my bags with a sense of anticipation. The journey to the coastal town was smooth, and as I arrived, I was struck by the natural beauty of the surroundings. The rolling hills, the expansive ocean views, and the charming town center created an atmosphere of tranquility and possibility. During my stay, I engaged in a variety of activities that allowed me to connect with the local community and explore my interests. I took art classes from local instructors, enjoying the creative process and the opportunity to learn new techniques. The town's galleries and workshops were filled with vibrant expressions of local talent, and I found inspiration in the artistry and craftsmanship of the region. I also spent time hiking along scenic trails, soaking in the beauty of the coastal landscape. The quiet solitude of the trails provided a perfect backdrop for reflection and introspection. It was during these hikes that I found moments of profound clarity, a deeper understanding of myself, and a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, I attended a local festival celebrating the town's cultural heritage. The event was filled with music, dance, and local cuisine. It was a joyful experience, and I enjoyed mingling with the locals, learning about their traditions, and celebrating the vibrant community spirit. The festival was a reminder of the richness of life and the importance of embracing new experiences. As the days passed, I felt a growing sense of contentment and fulfillment. The trip had provided me with the space and opportunity to reflect on my journey, to celebrate my achievements, and to embrace new beginnings. It was clear that the experiences I had gone through had shaped me, but they no longer defined me. I was moving forward with a renewed sense of hope and possibility. When it was time to return home, I did so with a sense of optimism and excitement. The trip had been transformative, offering me new insights and a fresh perspective. I felt ready to continue building on the positive changes I had made and to embrace the future with an open heart. Back home, I found that the experiences and lessons from the trip had a lasting impact. I continued to engage in the activities and interests I had discovered, and I made an effort to incorporate the sense of adventure and creativity into my daily life. The trip had been a catalyst for change, and I was committed to continuing the journey of self-discovery and growth. As I looked ahead, I felt a renewed sense of confidence and purpose. The past had shaped me, but it no longer held me back. I was ready to face the future with courage and optimism, embracing the opportunities and challenges that lay ahead. The journey wasn't over, but I was beginning to see it as a journey of exploration and possibility. With each step, I was discovering new aspects of myself and finding joy in the process of building a life that was truly my own. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it with an open heart and an adventurous spirit. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself settling into a new rhythm of life, one that was marked by growth, self-discovery, and a renewed sense of purpose. The experiences of the past had forged a path that was both challenging and rewarding, and I was beginning to see the fruits of my efforts in both my personal and professional life. One day, while going through some old files and papers, I came across a box of memories, photos, letters, and mementos from my life with Jessica. It was a bittersweet reminder of the years we had spent together, a mixture of joy and sorrow. As I sifted through the items, I felt a pang of nostalgia, but I also recognized that they were part of my journey, not a hindrance to my progress. I decided to go through the box with a sense of reflection, allowing myself to remember the good times without getting bogged down by the past. I kept a few meaningful items, but most of the contents were carefully packed away to be stored or donated. It was a symbolic act of moving forward, letting go of what no longer served me, and making space for new memories and experiences. With a sense of closure, I continued to focus on the positive aspects of my life. My work was thriving, and I was taking on new projects that challenged and inspired me. I had also developed a network of supportive friends and colleagues who played a significant role in my continued growth and happiness. One day, while attending a professional event, I ran into an old acquaintance who had heard about my recent journey. They were genuinely interested in my story and offered words of encouragement and support. Their interest was a reminder of how far I had come and how my experiences could inspire and help others. As the year drew to a close, I took some time to reflect on the lessons I had learned and the progress I had made. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had also been transformative. I had learned to embrace change, to find strength in adversity, and to build a life that was true to who I was. The final chapter of this journey wasn't about the end of a story but about the beginning of a new one. It was about embracing the possibilities that lay ahead and continuing to build on the foundation I had established. I felt a sense of accomplishment and optimism as I looked toward the future. I decided to mark this new chapter with a personal milestone, writing a letter to myself. In it, I reflected on the journey I had been on, the lessons I had learned, and the goals I wanted to achieve. It was a way to acknowledge my growth and to set intentions for the future. As I sealed the letter and placed it in a special box, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The journey had been challenging, but it had also been rewarding. I had come to terms with the past and was ready to embrace the future with confidence and hope. In the end, the story wasn't just about the pain and betrayal but about the strength and resilience that emerged from it. It was about finding a path forward, creating new opportunities, and discovering a renewed sense of purpose. As I closed this chapter, I did so with a sense of gratitude for the journey and a hopeful outlook for what was to come. The past had shaped me, but it was the future that beckoned with endless possibilities. And with each new step, I was ready to embrace it with an open heart and an adventurous spirit.